You're listening to audio from the Decidedly podcast. For more information, find us on Instagram at Decidedly Podcast.
So remember when I was younger, and I wanted to change my name? Like, I think a lot of kids go through that phase where they're like, I'm gonna have this like totally different identity. I'm not Bobby. I'm James.
The story behind that is we go up to watch you play Little League.
Mhm.
And everybody's out there, the whole team's out there, on the field, throwing balls and stuff.
5 years old playing t-ball.
Yeah, playing t-ball. Yeah. And so I'm talking with the coach who's kind of watching you guys out there. And he goes, and I introduced myself. And this is the first time I met him. And I said, well, I'm Sanger's dad. Oh, and he kind of he has this blank look on his face. And he goes, now tell me again. I said, Sanger's dad. I said, out there in the green hat. He goes, the green hat, George? I go, that's his name isn't George.
It's not even my middle name.
No, he goes, sir, he says his name is George.
Don't know why to this day. I thought George was a cool name. Yeah. But I also really wanted to be bald. I wanted to shave my head bald as a kid around the same time that I wanted to be George, because I watched Space Jam. And in my head, the only difference between me and Michael Jordan was that he was bald.
That was the only. That was it. That was the only thing you saw different.
There was one thing that was keeping me from being Michael Jordan, and he was bald, and I had hair.
Okay,
and I needed to get rid of it. Don't know why I didn't want my name to be Michael, but I wanted to be bald. Speaking of Michael Jordan, our guest today not only knows him but played with him on the 1982 North Carolina NCAA championship team. So, Coach Matt Doherty, player at North Carolina, head coach of the North Carolina Tar Heels, also coached at SMU, Notre Dame, and now is a business executive coach. We talked about some great stories from his coaching years and his playing years at North Carolina. He has a lot of wisdom as a coach to give, not only for basketball, for business too. We talked about the unique roles and responsibilities of visionaries and how we need to show up to run our companies at elite levels. So I think you're going to learn a lot, regardless of whether you know basketball. Coach Matt Doherty, I'm Sanger Smith. This is Sean Smith, and this is Decidedly. Coach, I'm glad you're here. I want to get your opinion on something that I was thinking about the other day. So I just called you coach, and you were never my coach. And coach is not even it's not the only or even necessarily primary vocation of your life. But in our culture, once a coach, always a coach. It's this esteemed title that lives with you forever. If I ran into my 5th grade Pop Warner football coach, I would call him coach. I wouldn't call him Mr. Norman. I wouldn't say Jody. I'd say, hey, coach. In fact, that happened to me one time. I ran into a Little League soccer coach. It was some kid's dad. Right. He would just coach the team for that year. And I was like, oh, Coach Tucker. And he was thrown off, nobody's called me that in forever. Wow. So why do you think that is in our culture, that coach is so esteemed?
Yeah, thank you. It's probably the second coolest title that I have behind dad. I love being called dad. And I really, really like being called coach. And, I've been called coach. I'm an executive coach, been for 5 years. And my clients call me coach. They refer to me as coach. And I don't stop them. I like it. I'm proud of it. I believe my purpose is to be a teacher and a coach. That's what I'm put on. That's what my unique ability. And I think it's my gift from God, and my job is to use it in his to glorify him, right? And I'm doing the best I can. Why is it in our culture? Billy Graham said something along the lines that a coach will have more of an impact on young people than anybody else. Parents, pastors, preachers, coaches. It's unique relationship. I think, especially in our country, that we have over coaches. Just think back, and if you have children, your parents could get you to eat vegetables. Your parents could try to get you to make your bed. And the thing that really makes your parents mad is when you come home and say, Coach McKillop said that I should start making my bed in the morning because, it's just, you accomplish one thing and it sets the tone for the rest of the day.
Yeah. Now all of a sudden they want to make their bed.
Make your bed. And you're like, you could fight it as a parent, but you're like, okay, this makes sense. Let me contact Coach McKillop. Tell him to do the laundry. Tell him to cut the grass. Tell him to, it takes a village to raise a child. And I think that coaches, we're revered. They're revered as long as they are leading young people in the right manner.
I remember growing up, coaches in my life. I mean, I just came across, this just happened.
I remember stories of your coaches that were so impactful that you told me when I was a kid.
That I told you coaches?
That I remember, and so there are people that coached you that I never met, might have died before I was born, that actually impacted my life because you would tell me, oh man, this guy.
So
Sean, does he always throw you under the bus like that? I mean, that was passive aggressive.
Whoa.
Wow.
I'm saying that's good.
Oh, he just basically said you're old. He age shamed you.
Yeah, you picked up on that, huh? Yeah.
Oh,
he threw that in.
Yeah. The other thing I picked up on is I didn't get the Army green T-shirt memo.
Yeah, you didn't get that memo.
Yeah, we color coordinate on Thursdays.
So we were talking about how important it is. I think even for the coach to be a coach. This just happened a couple of weeks ago. A buddy of mine sent me a framed picture that it said, thank you to Coach Castle from the championship soccer team. This was from when I was a kid, and we all signed it.
Wow.
And what was just like hit me in the heart is he kept that his whole life. He had just passed away. His son found it and sent it, to Gene.
Wow.
And he had kept that his whole, it was that meaningful. But you're right. I mean, the coaches make such an impact. Did you grow up in an athletic family?
Yes. My dad played minor league baseball. He was from the Brooklyn. My mom was from the Bronx. My dad was a good track star in high school, LaSalle Academy, very humble, never talked about it, and tried to play minor league baseball, played for the Scranton Red Barons, and they're still a team. And then just, I think first generation Long Islanders were raised by the men from Brooklyn and the Bronx and Queens. And, sports was a big part of that, especially in the middle class, right? Where you could compete. It was a great equalizer from a socioeconomic standpoint, something you're really proud of. And also it could advance your life through getting college scholarships, right? So we took great pride and amazing influences growing up in East Meadow, which is about 30 miles from New York City. I had the Knicks, the Nets. The Nets were the Long Island, the New York Nets with Dr. J. They were 5 minutes from my house at the Nassau Coliseum, literally 5 miles from my house. The Long Island, the Islanders, the hockey team, won 3 or 4 Stanley Cups in a row in the early 80s. I graduated high school in 80. The Rangers, the New York Giant football team, the New York Jets. I got to see Joe Namath practice at Hofstra University when I was a kid. My dad brought me there. Got to see Willie Mays play for the Mets. I jumped on the Yankee bandwagon in the 70s with Reggie Jackson and Thurman Munson. So you had these teams, and then college teams, St. John's, Hofstra, and you had these teams right there in your face. My dad signed me up for basketball camp in 4th grade, bought me my first jock, handed me my jock, and he said, when a coach is correcting you, don't say I know.
Yeah.
Right? Like, wow. Yep. That is powerful. He's telling me you got to be coachable. And fast forward, my son was, 4th grade, and I'm sending him off to camp, but I'm saying the same thing to him. And I realized my son was a know-it-all, like I was a know-it-all, and my dad knew it. So he's like, basically, be quiet and take instruction well. So it was a big part of my identity as a kid. I quit baseball in 6th grade because I read a book, by Bill Bradley called Life on the Run, and he played for the Knicks. And it said, if you're not working on your game and somebody else is, when you two meet, that other person will have the advantage. And I didn't love baseball enough to stick with it. I love basketball. And my dad, who was the minor league baseball player, no problem with it. And so I just played basketball year round, and I loved it so much. And the beautiful thing about basketball is you could work on your game by yourself. It was hard to do that with baseball or football or street hockey.
That's a good point. Like, I like jujitsu. The worst part about jujitsu is I got to have someone who wants to come do jujitsu with me. You know, I cannot get up at 10 p.m. and do jujitsu in my backyard.
Yeah, by yourself.
Right? But basketball, like that was, I was never good at basketball. I was terrible. It was my worst sport. But I did love playing basketball as a kid because it was something that all the neighborhood kids are gone. My friends are on vacation. Nobody's around. I don't have a brother. My cousin's out of town, whatever. I could go play basketball though.
So how did you end up at North Carolina? Were you recruited by Dean Smith, or did you?
Yes. Dean Smith had a history dating back to before him, Frank McGuire, who was from New York City, of recruiting New York players. So when Coach Smith worked for Frank McGuire, he continued that trend of recruiting players from New York. So there was a underground railroad from New York to Chapel Hill. And, it was just common that they were going to recruit New York. One of their assistants, Eddie Fogler, was from Queens. I remember 76, they went to the Olympics, and Coach Smith coached and had 4 Tar Heels on the team. And then the next year, they went to the Final Four in 77, had a guy named Michael Korn from Jersey City, who was a 6'7" white guy who I could relate to as a 6'7" white guy from New York. And I'm like, that guy's cool. I want to play like him. He had 31 points in the semifinals of the Final Four against UNLV. And I just kept following him. And they were always the cream of the crop in the ACC and in the country. And, if I could be recruited by them, that would be a dream come true. And it turned out to be a dream come true.
So you played on the 82 team that won the championship. That was just, if you look at that team, they're just stacked with talent on the court and off the court. But not every team that is stacked with talent wins championships.
Yeah.
What did you figure out by being involved in that you're able to carry forward?
Yeah, it's funny. I'm an executive coach, and I talk about the organizational triangle. Every organization is made up of talent, systems, and culture. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we've got talent, systems, and culture. Got it.
Yeah. Now that's blame my first grade teacher, Sister Maureen at St. Raphael's, for my poor handwriting. But systems and culture, the better your systems, the better your culture, the better your talent will perform. Okay.
Right.
And so Dean Smith had great systems and great culture. However, I say culture is king because you could have great systems and great talent, but if you don't have great culture, you're not going to be successful. I've seen teams, and we all have, that have average talent, average systems, but a great culture, and they win. You might say the USA Hockey in 1980. For basketball fans, Jim Vivano's team in 1983, they were not uber talented. They didn't have elite systems in terms of trying to trick the opponent. But boy, oh boy, they had an elite culture. And so Dean Smith had an elite system and an elite culture. And it starts, and I give talks on this. I'm going to give a talk on it tomorrow. It starts with your core values. Like, what are your core values? What do you believe is important for your team, your organization? Coach Smith, it was 3 things: play hard, play smart, play together. Okay, so what does that look like? What does playing hard look like? Well, most high school kid thinks we're playing hard. No, playing hard is sprinting the floor at 100%, diving on every loose ball, drawing every charge possible, sprinting to the sideline at a timeout. That's playing hard. Playing smart, remembering the plays, knowing where you're supposed to be, taking good shots, taking care of the ball. And then playing together is, he had a simple rule. If There was an open man, pass the ball. Now, the challenge is a lot of us have these core values and the behaviors rooted in the core values, but we don't hold people accountable. And that's the challenge. One, are you willing to hold somebody accountable? Two, is that person willing to be held accountable? And it starts in the recruiting process. So when I talk to companies all the time, what are your core values? I'll go speak tomorrow and I'll say, who here has core values? And I'll see 99% of the hands go up. And I'll go around the room. I'll say, what are your core values? And they'll go, They don't know. They don't remember. I call it wall art. And I say, okay, if you know them, how do you activate them? Mm-hmm. And so it starts in the recruiting process. Coach Smith came into my home in 1979 and basically talked about the core values of playing hard, smart together. And he told me, he said, you'll be lucky to play by the time I'm a junior. And I was an All-American. Other coaches weren't telling me that. And so I could do one of two things. I could either say, ooh, that's not cool, I'm out. Or I could lean in and say, I'll show you. And I leaned in and I said, I'll show you. Because as Nick Saban says, A players want to play with A players. And they want to be held accountable because they want to get better. They want to win. You know, the C players don't want to be with the A players because why? They get exposed.
Yeah. Mediocre players, mediocre performers hate high performers hate mediocre performers, and you got to have the same standard. It would be better to be open about your standard of mediocrity.
Yes. But I tell people, I tell players that wanted to be, recruited to high level, I'm like, okay, you want exposure, just be careful. You're going to get exposed. So you guys are in Texas. Arch Manning, the hottest name in college football, right?
Yeah.
He played at Ohio State in his first full game and got exposed. So now what is he going to do? And just by what little I know about his character, he took the hit. He said, I need to play better. All right. So now I'm plugging my book. Does he rebound? Can he rebound? Can he watch the film? Can he take accountability? Can he pick himself up off the floor, dust himself off, and go back with the same enthusiasm he had to start the season? That's what champions do. And everyone has failed, from Michael Jordan to Arch Manning.
Did you talk a little, you brought your book up, you talk a little bit about that in your book on when you began to coach there and the struggles you had there. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. The struggles at North Carolina. I was a head coach for 1 year. So I played at North Carolina, worked on Wall Street for 4 years, thought I wanted to get rich like you guys and get people involved in investments, and realized that the yield curve didn't quite fire me up, and quit my job, moved to North Carolina, ended up in coaching, coached for Bob McKillop at Davidson. Bob, Steph Curry's coach, was my high school coach. Coached for Roy Williams for 7 years at Kansas. Head coach at Notre Dame for 1 year. And then I ended up in Chapel Hill for my second, third, fourth years. It's just so many life lessons, leadership lessons that I learned. Managing change is the biggest one. How do you manage change? How do you take over for an elite leader? You've seen it in football, with Nick Saban leaving, the new coach at Alabama. That's hard to do. And I try to do that following Dean Smith and Bill Guthridge while instilling some change, bringing my staff and maybe a little stylistic change. And once things didn't go well, people piled on, and it was tough to recover.
Why do you think that happens so often that it's almost a trope that people use? You don't want to follow the guy. You want to follow the guy who follows the guy, because there is this drop off in quality. We're seeing it at Alabama, right? And what do you think is happening that happens on it over and over about when somebody comes in following somebody who's had a lot of success? Is it just a matter of them not executing on the culture or changing the culture in a negative way? Or what do you think happens?
It's not an exact science. I think first of all, people get amnesia. They forget, like the previous coach, there's a reason he retired. Most of them, might have been starting to tail off a little bit. They would complain about the old coach for some reason, but, then all of a sudden they get amnesia and they remember all the good things. And I'm not talking about North Carolina. I'm trying to think of, Jay Wright. I'm trying to think of Tom Osborne at Nebraska, and there's just the timing too sometimes. Like the coach got out at the right time. With the NIL and college athletics, it is harder to build dynasties in football and basketball than it was before.
Yeah.
So Nick Saban sees it. I think he won. I don't know if he won the championship or lost in a championship game to Georgia. Apparently, the story goes back to his office, and like that week, 4 players come in and ask about their NIL money, whether they were going to start or not. And if they weren't, they were going to transfer. And his wife said to him, like, what are we doing here? So he quit. So the next coach has to try to still do that under the current rules with NIL and, who has the biggest budget. You look at Oregon's budget, they got like 40 million they're spending on their roster. Ohio State, 40 million. Is Alabama? Maybe they are. So there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes. I think one of the biggest things that a coach that has had great experience is the political clout that they have at an institution that is tough for the new person to connect with in a short time. Getting to know the chancellor, the primary fundraiser, the governor of the state, like that stuff is important. And I probably didn't, I felt if I did my job, I recruited well and coached well, that should be enough. But it's more than that. Like knowing who owes you favors. Like Coach Smith was politically savvy as heck. Right? So, he needed some things done. He could call the right people.
What's an example of something that a basketball coach is going to need to cash in as far as political favor?
Yeah, well, maybe somebody wrote a bad article. Maybe you need funding for your arena. So you need state funds at a public university.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, maybe you got stopped for a DUI. I'm not saying that happened. I'm just saying, maybe one of your players got arrested. What can you do to make sure there's not a negative light shown on your program? And on the flip side, how can you put your program in best light, whether it be financial, PR, or otherwise?
I guess what I'm asking is there had to be lessons that you learned that you now carry forward in your executive coaching business. When you look at and say, wow, man, when I was coach there, I would have done this differently.
Yeah, I think I am a very practical, pragmatic person. So if someone tells me something, I take it for face value. But not everyone tells you what they mean. They don't want to admit certain things. So I was told that it's my program, run it how you see fit. Mm-hmm. And that's what I wanted to hear before I took the job. But that wasn't the case.
Is that sort of like when your wife says, sure, if you want to buy the motorcycle, you do what you want. Yeah.
I can imagine. I had a volunteer position on a board of a nonprofit, and I was told, hey man, you're in charge of this area of the nonprofit. You do whatever you want. I realized real quickly that nobody meant that at all. And I handled it poorly. I got discouraged and I kind of was just like, hey, who cares?
Yeah. So I ran it like it was my program. And I know I brought my assistants on board. I handled the seating in the arena. I had 300 tickets, access to 300 tickets. Looking back, and then one of Dean Smith's friends called me and he said, you need to call Coach Smith more. And I'm like, what? Like, I was really confused. I'm like, what? like he's retired, and I, as a player, had a relationship. Like I wasn't just going to knock on his office door and say, "What's up, coach?" and sit down. He had this aura about him that, was weird for me to just pick up the phone and say, "Hey, coach, how you doing? What's going on?" Like I'd been to his house one time as a player. So there was a little bit of awkwardness. And the other thing, you ask for advice, and what if you don't employ that advice?
Yeah.
So you're saying, "Hey, I'm thinking about this zone offense," or I'm thinking about it, and then he says, "I got a great play for you," and you don't run it.
And then you lose.
Then it's like, that's a slap in the face. So anyway, I was ignorant in my lack of emotional intelligence in managing up to Dean Smith, who was not on the org chart.
Yeah.
So I talk about the org chart, and it's the off the org chart power broker that in certain institutions, political institutions which universities are, that are the most like you got to address. And so I should have addressed it more. I should have included him more. I should have spent more time with him. And I'm embarrassed to say that to you all, because that is probably an obvious statement.
Well, I
don't
think
know.
It's obvious
can,
in hindsight. I'm not sure it would be obvious at the time.
Yeah, I can see exactly how I would do something similar. Like, I think if you have such a respect for someone, you're even less likely to just call them up.
Yeah, like I called him up about like who to vote for. It was funny conversation. It was the presidential election, so it was like, I guess I'm embarrassed to tell you, I forget the years, 2000.
Okay.
And he can really sell, and selling is manipulation. In my leadership practice, a friend of mine once said, "Good leadership is manipulation with good intent." Yeah. Okay, so manipulation is a very strong word, right? So I called Coach Smith and I said, there's got this election. My head's been in the sand with recruiting and coaching. What do you think? Like, who should I vote for? He's like, "Oh, of course you're going to vote Democratic. Of course, for the people." And it goes on and on. I grew up Republican, and I'm like, oh gosh, like one of these. Now, fortunately, he wasn't in the booth when I checked the box or filled in the oval. But I remember calling him about that. But some of my favorite moments were after games or practices. He would have some notes, and legal pad, like pages. And we'd go through in the coach's office, the coach's locker room, and we talk about it. And his mind was unbelievable on a lot of things. But I just love talking basketball with him. And I remember a question I asked, and I thought he would give me a straight answer. I said, "All right, coach, up 3, 7 seconds to go, other team has the ball. What do you do? Do you foul, or do you try to let him take a tough 3?" I thought he was going to give me an answer. He's a math guy. He was, the points per possession is such a big thing now in basketball. Mm-hmm. He was doing that in the 70s. When I played, he'd give us points per possession at halftime. So I'm thinking he's going to give me some like mathematical reasoning for why you should or should not foul. And he said, well, he always whined. He never cursed, by the way, not even on the golf course. He said, well, Frank would say, meaning Coach McGuire. So now I'm getting this, like, this is really cool. Like I am like one step away from James Naismith, who's the game.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, Frank would say that you have to do what the fans understand, because at the end of the day, basically you're saying they're going to influence whether you stayed employed or not.
Wow.
How about that?
That's not the answer I would have
thought. That was not what I would have ever thought.
Yeah. So managing Coach Smith, like in leadership, if you have a board, you have to manage up. And I talk about that all the time. How do you manage up to your board? Are you keeping them involved? Are you giving them news that things are not going to go well? That we're going to get a bad report. You don't want to surprise them. Who are you politically aligned with on your board? You want to be able to call favor on your board. And sometimes we put it off. We don't have time, too busy. I don't want to deliver bad news. And all of a sudden it's too late. Bam. So I run a family-run business. I was the president and CEO of a family-run business. So when I talk to businesses that are family-run, I get it. You talk to family-run businesses, Sanger, about their money. Yeah. You were involved in a family-run business. Your dad handed off things to you, right? And so Dean Smith handed it off to his brother, Bill Guthridge, and handed it off to his son, Coach Smith's son, Matt Doherty. Yet they both had offices in the building. So when you took over for your father, did he have a corner office? Did he show up every day? Did he not? Did he totally step away? How involved was he? Was he involved on a consistent basis, an inconsistent basis? When he walked in the room, did everyone look at him? Like those things are real. How do you manage that?
Yeah, that's fascinating. I think, when you talk about the organizational structure that you were mentioning earlier about talent systems and culture, a lot of what you're talking about, I think, falls into that cultural category.
That's
and
right.
That the leader steps in, there was a culture that had been established. And if there's a failure to elevate that culture, advance that culture forward, then I think the A players start to drop off.
Now, that's the harder job. I think as a coach, it's December. What can you really do about your talent? Nothing. You can't do anything. In the NBA, you could beg your GM for a trade, but college you can't do anything. And as a owner of a business, there may not be much you can do at any given moment either. If your talent's average and you go, well, we really need to do an overhaul, that's not something that can happen overnight. Culture, and you may be influenced by the economic situation, your own financial situation as a company. We can't just hire new great players, but culture is the thing that the leader has to be responsible for and take an active interest in improving and curating. And I see a lot of people focus as a visionary person on the systems instead of the culture. And the systems are important. I agree with you. But I don't know that a lot of people who find themselves in the leadership position are the best person in their organization to create the systems. They are the best person to create the culture, and they're setting the culture regardless of whether they're trying to or not.
Bingo. You nailed it, Sanger. I agree 100%. A couple of things I wrote down while you were talking. You've got to build your bench. And this comes up a lot, especially with small to mid-sized companies that may not have the budget. When you have a person who's maybe a top performer or in a leading role and he or she is not producing, and a lot of times that person has the leverage because there's no backup. So Coach Smith, we had all Americans on the bench. So what's the quickest way to motivate you in practice? He would say, the worst thing he could say to me was, Doherty, Exum, change jerseys. And he'd do this. That meant I went from the white team, which was the starters, to the backup. And Cecil went from the backup to the starters. I'm like, oh, damn, right? So that forced me, if I had any competitive bone in my body, to step up my level for the rest of practice. And so in business, if the lead salesperson is not producing and there's no backup, then the owner of the company is either got to do it him or herself or live with it, right? Yeah. And so it's important to, like I always ask people when they complain about somebody, I say, well, why'd you hire them? Like you hired them.
Yeah.
You put them in that position. Oh, they were there. And the person above them left. I'm like, well, that's too bad. You put them in the wrong spot. And then the culture piece It's easy to measure systems, right? Because you'd see it, touch it, feel it, look at it on a spreadsheet, whatever it might be. Culture is hard to feel. It's hard to measure the immediacy of the impact of a culture.
Yeah.
It takes time, right? It's usually measured through retention or surveys or smiles or people who are willing to stay past 5 o'clock. But it's harder to measure, but it has a long lasting impact. And often people don't know how to intentionally drive a championship culture. That's a talk I'm giving tomorrow at a dental conference. And I was blessed to be a part of it at North Carolina. Coach Smith intentionally drove it. He had his core values. He talked about it in the recruiting process. We'd had a thought of the day, an emphasis of the day, like hit the first open man you see. If you didn't do that, he blew the whistle and put your team on the baseline to run a sprint.
And nobody else can do that role. I mean, other than maybe a team captain. But I would imagine that if you're on a team where the assistant coach or one of the players is taking up that mantle of, hey, I'm going to instill the culture, that team is not going to perform like they would if the head coach were the one taking the reins of the culture.
The head coach / CEO is empowered with 3 things, and no one else can do these 3 things. Cast a vision, drive the culture, and engage in large business transactions. Cast a vision, drive the culture, engage in large business transactions. You cannot delegate those 3 things.
Yeah.
And if you can't do that as a leader, you might be in the wrong seat. Like as a vision, where are we going? We want to win a championship. We want to cut down nets. We want to parade down Main Street on campus. To do that, we need to do A, B, and C. The culture here is play hard, play smart, play together. If a man is open, you pass the ball.
Yeah.
It's a team game. And then the large business transactions, recruiting the big players or building new arenas or, raising money. That's a head coach type of thing.
At UNC, y'all won in a national championship, but you didn't win all 4 years of playing. I hear a lot of guys who talk about winning a championship, talk about how something changed the year after they win the Super Bowl, or, the year before we just didn't quite have the vibe, and then this year we feel good and they end up winning. So even though the jersey stays the same, the coach stays the same, some of the players stayed the same, did you notice a cultural shift in those years that you didn't win, or was it relatively the same?
Well, I think you become the hunted versus the hunter, right? Same people, different players. They maybe come back with different expectations. The main difference between us winning a championship in 82 and not in 83 was James Worthy went pro, and we lost Jimmy Black. So our personnel was different. We didn't win a national championship in 1983. We had the best team in the country, and it's the best team I ever played on. Kenny Smith was our point guard. Sam Perkins, Michael Jordan, Brad Doherty. But we had some unfortunate injuries. And, at the end of the year, it is one bad game and you're done.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that we were undefeated. We were 21-0 that year. I thought we had the mature mindset and competitive nature to achieve at a high level. And we were undefeated, 21-0. And then Kenny Smith broke his wrist, and we lost at Arkansas. Missed a shot at the buzzer that would have either tied it or won it. And so, yeah, I thought you need a maturity, players that understand and that are competitive. And, we had that, but you see one and dones, teams get too much attention. They can't handle it.
Do you see that happen with businesses?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. So Jeff Van Gundy, NBA coach, has a great quote. Do not accept in victory what you would not in defeat. All right. Do not accept in victory what you would not in defeat. I've used that with many of my clients as an executive coach. Some companies did very well during the pandemic because they got ERC money and, they were, for whatever reason, there was a tailwind. Oh, all of a sudden they think it's about them. They think they're doing it. They think that, all of a sudden people are coming in a little late. People aren't meeting deadlines. And then all of a sudden COVID's over and the money's not there and they're getting their butt kicked.
Yeah.
Right.
Now everybody's working from their house.
Right. You can't drive a culture. So that's why I'm big and Dean Smith was, and Nick Saban is about process. It's golf. It's one shot at a time. You're playing against a golf course. You're putting the best putt on the ball that you can, and the wind, a spike mark, whatever might knock it off course. But did you put the best stroke? Did you put yourself in position? Did you follow your ritual? Did you practice? If you did those things, you will win in the long term. But if you get to the point where, you know what, I just won the Masters, I don't need to practice. I'm going to go to Vegas and then show up at the next golf tournament, you're going to be spraying it all over the golf course. So, yeah. It's the process and enjoying the grind, embracing the grind. Those are the true champions.
So you mentioned that the leader's role is looking at, cast the vision, drive the culture, engage in large transactions. When you look at your not only playing but coaching background, and now as executive coach, particularly with the teams that you're involved in, it would seem like casting the vision might lose something, because do a lot of people come in and say, our vision this year is to win a national championship? Or do they get more realistic and say, hey, we've got sort of a subpar team here. Maybe we just want a winning percentage. How do you best cast that vision, taking into account the talent you're dealing with? Yeah,
it's a great question. I went from Kansas every year, where we were good enough to win a national championship, to Notre Dame, where, that was more, I wanted to bring Notre Dame basketball back. Okay. That was the vision. Notre Dame, when I was growing up, Kelly Tripucka, Adrian Dantley, beating UCLA and ending UCLA game, 88 game win streak. I wanted to bring that back. All right. So that was less defined by number of wins or NCAA tournament. That was, all right, we're going to put Notre Dame basketball back on the map. I got to North Carolina, win the national championship. Then I got to coach at SMU, and it was like, hey, we want to put SMU back on the map. SMU had gone to the Final Four in, I think, 72 or something like that. We want to put SMU back on the map. So I think you have to have that stretch vision where it is relatable, achievable, and not so far-fetched that people look at you like, oh, he's full of crap. There he goes again.
Yeah. How are you seeing that exemplified in some of the executive coaching that you're doing? So in corporate environments?
That's a great question. Good question. It's hard to create that because you don't have parades on Main Street. You don't have the ends of seasons per se. So you got to kind of create that. What's your BHAG, Jim Collins, big, hairy, audacious goal? What excites the masses? What is the target? Are you sharing the financial goal? What's our revenue goal? Are you measuring it? Is it on the scoreboard? Is it up there? Like, all right, this is our number. It's like a fundraising drive where they have the thermometer with the numbers. Like, where are we? The good players want to be measured. C players don't want to be measured because, again, they get exposed. I want to be measured. The best way to motivate me was to put me on a list. All right, put me on a list and rank me against Michael Jordan, Sam Perkins in different things, foul shooting percentages, assist to turnover ratio. I knew I wouldn't beat them in certain stats like block shots, but I can compete with them in other areas. So make a list and let's go. Right. And so what is our goal? All right. What is the goal of the department? Are we tracking that? Are we holding people accountable? So creating realistic goals. A lot of my clients, and I encourage it and I use it, is EOS, which is the Entrepreneur's Operating System. It's actually another book I've got here. I'll promote this book. It's not my book. It's a way to run your business.
Yeah. Traction. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's what I'm talking about. Systems. That's the system part, right? And EOS is a good system. It's off the shelf. You don't have to try to recreate it. but how are you holding people accountable? Measure, what you measure gets managed. What are the leading indicators, KPIs, whatever you want to call it? And what's the scorecard look like? We want to get to this. Are you doing the job today to get to this big goal?
So let me ask you the kind of final question. When you think about decision making, this is actually one of the reasons I was excited to talk to you about. I've heard you quote, it went something along the lines of that your life is a series of decisions and dealing with the consequences.
That's right.
I may have not quoted that correctly.
No, you nailed it. You nailed it.
All right.
Yeah, I'd give you a star if you were there.
So, I spend a lot of time thinking about decision making. So that quote sort of hit me. When you think about the biggest decision making tip you have for business owners, what would that be?
Yeah, I think it would be to be a part of a peer advisory group. Okay. And I'm a Vistage chair, executive coach, peer advisory. When you make a big decision, I would run it by your peer advisory board. And if you're not part of a Vistage group, peer advisory board, I would create a personal board of directors. And there's someone in your backyard, Bob Bodine, who lives in Dallas. He runs an executive search firm. And he formalized that thought for me. We all have mentors and friends, but intentionally have a personal board of directors for financial support, for spiritual support, for, marital support, for career support, whatever it may be. And that board may change over time. Dean Smith and Roy Williams are on my board. Bob McKillop is on my board. A guy named Tim Hofarth, John Black. These people that when I have a big decision, I ask them. The challenge for me when I took the job at North Carolina, and would I stay at Notre Dame or go to North Carolina? Well, the two of the biggest people on my board, personal board, were Dean Smith and Roy Williams, and they both wanted me to take the North Carolina job. And so, having diversity on that board and be intentional, even I tell people, oh, by the way, Sanger, you're on my personal board of directors. What are you going to say to that? No?
Everyone would be thrilled.
Right.
Yeah.
So I value your wisdom. So when I make a big decision's thrust upon me, I tap the brakes. And I know my biggest strength is I'm aggressive and impulsive. And so I got to say, slow down, tap the brakes. Let me go to my board and then process the issue. That's what we do in Vistage. We're the oldest executive or largest executive coaching organization in the world now. And we bring these issues, our members bring it to the group and share, hey, should I buy this company? Should I sell it to PE? Should I hire my brother-in-law? Should I fire my brother-in-law? And process the issue amongst trusted peers who are in non-competing industries that have one goal. And that's to help you make the best decision you can.
How do people get in touch with you to be able to do that, to get
thank you.
Connected with you?
They could reach out to me at my email, which is matt@dohertycoaching.com. That is DOHERTY coaching.com, or just go to my website, dohertycoaching.com.
Thanks, Coach. I'm glad you came.
Great talking with you. Takeaway from talking with Coach Doherty is looking at that organizational structure that he mentioned about dealing with talent, culture, and systems, and that he really highlighted culture. And I think that is the most difficult thing for people to define and to implement. And he talked about making sure that you had a clear and motivating vision and values and things that we've talked about before, but just really reinforcing that the culture is the most important thing. It's also the most challenging. And I see people not spend time on it. They kind of jump over to operations and things like that.
I liked how he clearly articulated the three primary responsibilities of the CEO or visionary of the company, and that they can't be outsourced.
Right.
Large transactions, casting the vision, and driving the culture.
Yes.
Those are the things that nobody else in your team can do, and you have to do them.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of the Decidedly Podcast. To be notified when new episodes are released, be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. And while you're there, drop us a 5-star review because it helps more people defeat bad decision making right alongside you. For show notes, decision-making insights, more episodes, and links to resources mentioned in this episode, check us out at decidedlypodcast.com. If you'd like us to help you make a decision, leave us a message at decidedlypodcast.com/make-my-decision for a chance to have your question featured in an upcoming episode. For more decision-making content, check us out on Instagram or Facebook at Decidedly Podcast. As always, thanks for listening. This is Decidedly.